Welcome to The Deliberate Way. I'm Dan Seawald, your host, and I'm joined today by my friend Cassie Hildtich, who is a thought leader in all things sleep, from sleep inertia to napping, alertness, and fatigue countermeasures. We're going to hear a bit more about that. So, a few words about you, Cassie. Cassie is a senior research associate with San Jose State University in the great state of California, and she's based at the Fatigue Countermeasures Lab at NASA Ames Research Center in California. And according to my research, you started your love for studying sleep somewhat by accident while you were at the Adelaide Institute for Sleep Health, and that was Adelaide, Australia, right? Not Adelaide, New Jersey, I believe. We'll know you from your accent in a moment. After the Institute, you moved to London and worked as a risk management expert or researcher in fatigue and a consultant. And you had the chance to work with companies all around the world, from oil exploration in Libya and Angola to rescue helicopter operations in the Swiss Alps. Pretty cool, by the way. You went on to pursue your doctoral degree in psychology at the University of South Australia with the Center for Sleep Research. And now you're a senior research associate in the Fatigue Countermeasures Lab based at NASA. You are a contributor to the research missions at the lab, and you help to promote sleep health in the general public with people just like you and me. So, Cassie, it's awesome to have you. Thanks for coming and joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this chat.
Awesome. Well, I could think of no better way than to jump in and talk about something that just passed us by: daylight savings. Now, I always looked forward to daylight savings as a kid, especially springing forward. But it's become a bit of a polarizing topic lately, actually really political here in the United States. Some people say it's literally killing people. Is daylight savings killing people? And do you think we should do away with it? What do you think, Cassie?
Well, obviously, to say that it's killing people directly is perhaps a stretch, but when we look at sort of public health generally and sort of look at sort of from an epidemiological point of view, there is an increased risk of death and other sort of comorbidities or illnesses associated with sort of that change when we go from standard time to daylight saving time, specifically and particularly when we spring forward and we lose that hour of sleep, and we typically have to wake up an hour earlier than we usually do. So when we're usually asleep, that becomes our new sort of alarm clock time. And there are studies that have shown that sort of, again, if you're thinking about overall risk, there is an increased risk of hospital administrations, heart attacks, car accidents, and even increased suicide risk as well in that sort of week following that spring forward change.
I wouldn't have expected that. Like that. So there's an association, or there's perceived to be an association of increased suicidality during that because of that 1 hour. Or are people just so sad to lose the hour? What's your hypothesis of why that happens?
I'm not sure that. I mean, again, that data is sort of just looking at statistics and reported cases in that time frame and comparing it to other times of year. And there are modest increases, sort of 6%, but it is sort of a meaningful and significant difference. And the theory is, at least in that sort of immediate time change, where, as I say, you're losing an hour of sleep and you're also having to get up when you would normally be asleep. And so your sort of body clock is thrown off even just a little bit. And this can sort of affect mood and performance generally. And so that's probably what's sort of, triggering these other sort of cases. But it's not just the time switch itself, because obviously if we do away with daylight saving to avoid having these transition periods, we then have the option of either keeping daylight saving time permanently or going back to standard time permanently.
And where do you fall on the side? To put you on the hot seat for a moment. Should we do away with daylight savings? What do you think?
So personally, as a sleep researcher and sort of in line with most of the sleep research societies across the world, the choice is to do away with daylight savings and move to permanent standard time. So basically, on daylight saving time, we're not changing the length of sunlight. A lot of people associate daylight saving time with more sunlight. It's the Sunshine Protection Act,
Yes.
or protecting the sunlight. But
Right.
we're not changing orbital mechanics here. We're not changing the way that the Earth goes around the sun. We are just changing the light relative to what our clocks on our phones say and when our alarm is going to go off. And so that sort of, even just that slight adjustment, which means that we're receiving light later in the day and we're receiving less light earlier in the day, can actually start shifting us as a population a little bit later. But our bosses still need us to be, starting work at 9 a.m. We don't get, so our sort of social clocks are fixed, but the way the light overlays that clock is shifted. So this can lead to sort of people kind of going to bed later and later because of this light exposure in the evening. And then on top of that, in the morning, you have less light exposure to help you sort of wake up in the morning.
You're getting
And
hit
if you
on
think
both
about,
sides. You're taking in the morning and in the
right,
evening. Yeah.
yeah. And if you think about if we had daylight saving time during the winter, especially in sort of more northern latitudes, so up in sort of, you know, Minneapolis and Detroit and stuff like that, the sun's not going to be coming up until about 9 o'clock in the morning. So
Wow.
most people are going to be preparing for work and school and traveling to work and school in the dark. And I think they did actually try to make it permanent in the 70s and didn't even last a whole year because everyone hated it so much.
That's why the 70s was
Um,
a lost generation, apparently. That's what I hear.
yeah, yeah, I can neither confirm or deny that, but yeah, it's and I speak to it from again a sleep and circadian perspective of this sort of timing of your sleep and wake periods with light. But I can't speak to the sort of economic impacts because I think that's sort of the other argument. I don't know how much, having an extra hour of light in the evening makes a golf course X amounts of money, which improves the economy. I can't speak to that side of it, but certainly from a sleep health perspective, we're championing permanent standard time. There's also sort of a kind of natural experiment that we can point to in terms of overall sort of long-term exposure to these slightly later sunlight relative to clock time. And it's people that live on the western edge of a time zone versus people that live on the eastern edge of a time zone. So across, what is it, would be California and Nevada, I think, are all on Pacific time. But if I'm living here in San Francisco, the sun sets a lot later than in Las Vegas. And when they've done, again, sort of high level just pulling statistics of people that live on those eastern time zone, eastern edge versus western edge, there's a higher risk of a whole list of sort of illnesses if you live on
Wow.
the western edge with that slightly later daylight exposure.
I would never have considered that a risk factor of where you are on the eastern or western edge of a state. But I do know that my daughter, who is in Bloomington, Indiana, is all the way on the western edge of the Eastern Standard Time Zone and gets a lot more light and maybe happier. Can't say. But I'm going to take a step back for a minute. And we've been talking about sleep a lot, but I want to ask you, how sleep deprived are Americans in general? For example, how many hours of sleep do you think a normal adult should be getting? And on the average, what does the research say people are actually getting?
So the recommendation is for adults to get between 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. So that's a pretty wide range. And there are obviously some people that sort of would fall a little bit outside that range, but the majority of the population should be aiming to get about 7 to 9 hours a night.
Wow.
Um,
That's
when you
nine's a
look
lot
at
of hours.
surveys,
I don't see a lot of
what's
people
that,
getting
sorry?
nine. I don't see a lot of people getting 9 hours. But then again, I'm not in everybody's bedroom, not yet at least. But that seems like a lot. So 7 to 9's a range. But yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, so when they look at sort of surveys of, so there's American Time Use Survey, and there are other surveys that look at a whole range of things, and so they're not designed to ask about sleep, but they typically have, one or two questions in there about sleep that we can use to sort of track how much the population's getting over time. They typically fall out that about a third of the US population is getting less than 7 hours sleep per night.
Wow.
And those trends have changed a little bit over time, but it really depends on which survey data you look at as to whether it looks like it's trending better or worse. And it, you know, there's lots of limitations to just asking someone one question about how much sleep you on average you get per night.
Hmm.
But they're a pretty good indicator of, from a sort of um, 40,000 foot view perspective, that about a third of Americans are not getting the recommended amount of sleep per night.
For those people who aren't getting enough sleep, that which is a pretty significant number of people, and I'm going to guess they may be in jobs of significance or responsibility and safety. What's the impact? Is it just they're a little bit drowsy and they have a couple extra cups of coffee? What do you see as the quantifiable and non-quantifiable impact of those people not getting enough sleep?
Yeah, I mean, on the individual level for not getting enough sleep, you're going to feel worse, both in terms of your mood and then feeling sleepier, as you say, you might have to have a little extra caffeine. But your performance, your cognitive performance is also impaired. So if you're getting behind the wheel of a car and you're not getting the right amount of sleep, again, you're putting yourself at increased risk of having an accident due to that fatigue or sleep loss. But there's also health consequences too, and these are
Hmm.
perhaps more sort of long term. So if you're not getting enough sleep, it can increase your risk of developing sort of type 2 diabetes or obesity or other cardiovascular problems as well.
Hmm.
And then sort of on a population level, this turns into an economic cost as well of people not getting enough sleep. Um, in terms of absentee days due to being sick or being tired, and loss of productivity if you're turning up to work and not at your sort of full potential.
Yeah, and I remember that it was probably about 5 years ago, give or take. Do you remember Ariana Huffington went on this crusade, and she had a book that she put out, but it was like a personal mission to talk about sleep deprivation. She told the story of she was working, burning the candle at both ends, so to speak, working 18 plus hour days, and then one day her head fell over. She like literally blacked out and broke her cheekbone as she lost consciousness from lack of sleep. So she's been on the bully pulpit talking about this. And one of the things that it struck in me was how aware and how much do most Americans know about sleep being a top priority. I feel like most people just sort of dismiss it and say, yeah, I'll sleep when I'm dead, as that expression goes. What's your sense of how important sleep is to people?
I think sleep is still a little behind how we talk about the importance of diet and exercise.
Hmm.
But we really see sleep as sort of the third pillar of health along with diet and exercise. And there's more and more research showing that you need good sleep to even get the benefits of the exercise you're doing, for example. So, um, again, in sort of public health messaging about the importance of sleep versus the amount of messages that are out there about how you should diet and exercise, we're definitely behind, but I think that messaging is increasing at a rapid pace as we learn more about it and as we're able to speak to more people about it, and having, um, public figures championing it as well. Like Ariana Huffington is really great as well to
Yeah.
sort of get that information out there. Yeah.
Another reflection that I have, many moons ago when I just graduated college, I worked for one of the big six accounting auditing firms, Ernst and Young at the time. And my bosses there would make it a point of bragging. They would beat their chest and talk about how little sleep that they would get. And the less sleep you got, the more impressive it was. It was like a badge of honor for them. How did that, or does that continue to be culturally acceptable to make that a bragging point or a distinction of honor to go without sleep? And it's not just CPA firms, law firms, consulting firms, college, studying for late night exams. It seems to be not just acceptable, but a point of bragging for people. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I would say that unfortunately that point of view still exists a lot more than we'd like it to. Um, but one way to sort of um, try to be the antidote to that is to explain how much more you would get out of having sleep. So, a lot of the industries where getting not enough sleep is a bragging right are also very competitive, and they're places where having a slight edge over someone else is a huge difference. And getting a little bit more sleep can give you that edge, can make
Should
you
be the
think
opposite,
quicker,
right?
smarter, give you more insight, right? And it's the same for sort of, in the military or for sports teams. There's a lot of that kind of macho thinking of, uh, not having to sleep and whatnot, and sleep is for the weak. But more and more we're going in and being able to sort of challenge those perceptions, and really promote, not, rather than phrasing it as, well, these are all the bad things that happen when you don't sleep. These are all the good things that happen when you do sleep well. These
Mm.
are all the sort of added bonuses and things that'll improve.
It seems like sleep needs a marketing campaign the same way milk, the dairy industry did the Got Milk campaign all those years ago. Got sleep? Maybe somebody's already done it, but it sounds like there may be more of a need for promotion. I want to turn for just a moment to a topic that I know that's very near and dear to your heart, and it's this idea of sleep inertia. And I'd never heard the term for it, admittedly. It made sense to me, but what is it exactly? And how does sleep inertia impact your alertness and cognitive performance immediately after you wake up? Tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so probably everyone has experienced this at some point, but it's sort of when you wake up and for some reason you feel more tired than when you went to bed in the first place. So it's this transition from sleep to wake, and it just takes your brain a little bit of time to switch on all the switches and be back to sort of full capacity again. And so typically it's a pretty short period of time that you're feeling this sort of grogginess, disorientation, just wanting to hit the snooze button.
Uh-huh.
But depending on how much sleep or sleep loss you've had before and what time of day you've woken up, is it at your normal wake time or in the middle of the night? This will impact sort of how severe those symptoms are, how groggy you feel, and how long it takes to get over that feeling as well.
And what does that matter? I mean, I know this might sound like a really obvious question. You know, if is it just a natural state that we all experience? What's the negative consequences of maybe being less successful, of kind of getting the cobwebs out, to be a little overly colloquial?
Yeah. So yeah, for most of us, when we first wake up and in that sort of first 20 minutes, we're probably maybe scrolling through something on your phone. You might accidentally, like something that you didn't mean to, or you're making coffee and you might put the milk back in the cupboard instead of the fridge or something like that. So little mistakes that ultimately don't add up to much. But for people who work on shift, so have extended shifts and nap on shift, and or they work on call and be called at any time of day or night to sort of perform a safety critical activity. So think about all our emergency responders, our firefighters, ambulance officers that are making life-saving decisions, or operating vehicles immediately after waking, and it's sort of time is of the element. So in these cases, you're aligning this period of impaired cognitive performance, this grogginess, this disorientation, with having to think clearly and having to do really important things. So that's where sleep inertia can be sort of the most challenging and important to manage. But even though, for most of us, as I say, we're not going to be put in positions where our sleep inertia overlaps with something important, we might, in the very near future, and people sort of currently as well, in autonomous vehicles. So at the moment, we have about level 2 automation. We still have to have hands on the wheel. We still have to be able to be ready to take back control at any moment. But being put in that autonomous vehicle where we don't really have anything to do puts us as humans in a very vulnerable state for feeling sleepy and actually falling asleep. And if you
Interesting.
fall asleep, as several articles of Tesla drivers, just Google it, you'll find a whole bunch have fallen asleep at the wheel. And when the car gives back control, then they could be in that sleep inertia state when they wake up and have to sort of make that immediate decision without their sort of brain being fully back online to, take in all that information in such a quick space of time.
That's very interesting. My intuition was at first, being an autonomous vehicle, you're okay. You're fine because the car is doing the work for you. But your point is, the moment that you snap awake or you need to be alert immediately, and that drag, that inertia, to use the word,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
inertia is problematic. I didn't even consider other groups like bus drivers, truck drivers. I don't think of them as life-saving roles, but they certainly could be putting people at risk themselves too, if they're not able to be in a wakeful state as quickly as they ought to be.
Yeah, if they have shifts where they're napping or sleeping immediately before driving, I mean, there's always this sort of trade-off of napping is a really great countermeasure if you are suffering from sleep loss. So if you've been awake all night, taking a nap so that you can get some sleep to in response to that sleep loss. But you've just got to make sure that you have sort of a buffer after waking from that nap so that you get the benefits of the nap, but you avoid the sort of the risks of the sleep inertia after the nap.
Now, I'm going to ask you a very self-centered question for a moment. My wife is a very light sleeper and she prefers to sleep early. It just so happens I'm a pretty heavy sleeper and I like to go to bed late. I do my best thinking late at night. We have opposite schedules, and otherwise, it's a great marriage. We're very happy, but I might be slowly killing her. I'm not sure. Uh, what do you do when you have two people who have such different sleep cycles? What advice would you give, and any sort of insights from your experience?
Yeah, well, I could definitely speak to personal experience. Also, having my husband was a bartender for a long time, and so we were definitely sort of ships in the night when it came to sleeping and waking. But we sort of just worked in um, small changes, like if you're the one that gets up first, making sure that, if you happen to have um, a closet that's in your bedroom, picking out the clothes that you're going to wear, the next day beforehand and having them outside the bedroom, so that you're not sort of rummaging around when you first wake up. And then, yeah, sort of on the other side, if the later person's going to bed, having some sort of maybe very dim red light that you can have so that you can see what you're doing and not bumping and crashing into things, but you're not turning on the main light and waking people up when you come to bed late. And some people opt to, if it's a really extreme case, or for people that have sleep apnea and really loud snoring, some couples choose to sleep in separate beds in separate bedrooms. And obviously that's a personal discussion as to, how you make that work. But
Uh-huh.
if you have two people that are sleeping better, then you're going to have potentially a better relationship that way as well, with
Very, very
improved mood and
well. I think back to like old sitcoms and TV shows from the 1960s and 70s. And I always thought it was just more of a puritanical thing of like, we don't want to show a husband and wife sharing the bed. But I'm starting to think that maybe they had different sleep cycles, but perhaps that wasn't what was on their mind. Hard to say.
yeah,
Um,
maybe they were ahead of their time.
They were maybe in one era they're ahead of their time. I feel like Americans in general are chronically sleep deprived. People talk about it. It's always in the mainstream press, and it's a general conversation that you have around the quote unquote water cooler with friends and coworkers. There's so many books and interviews out there about sleep. I feel like I don't know what I can really trust. Um, who's getting it right? Who gets it right? And are there examples of people or organizations you'd point to if you said, I need to know more about sleep and I want to get it right? Who and where would you direct them to?
So there are some online resources through the National Sleep Foundation. So you can sort of go through their website and see what information they have that might be relevant to you. The Sleep Research Society also publishes some sort of public briefings on different topics as well. So they're sort of, very good sources of information.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I haven't read Matt Walker's book, so I'll put it out there. Sorry, Matt. Sorry, Dr. Walker. But
Yeah. What's the book
I,
or what's the
from
name?
what it's, oh gosh, now you make me sound
Sorry,
even worse. I think
put
it's
you on point there.
why do we sleep?
I will accept that answer.
Yeah, but Dr. Walker is a sleep researcher who has now sort of transitioned into being talking about sleep publicly, and being able to translate academic findings into sort of that more sort of pop science dialogue. And there's going to be a little bit lost in translation, but I think that from what I've heard from what he's done on different podcasts and whatnot, he has a very solid background in sleep and is one of the people that I would sort of probably recommend, checking out some of his podcasts or his books.
Awesome. I'm going to
And
look that up
yeah,
right away. I am intrigued. I've read a few different. I did read Ariana Huffington's book, and I thought it's well written. It's compelling. It's for the lay public, which I am. I did like that, so I'll give her a plug. But Matt Walker, Dr. Matt Walker, I'm going to check that out. I got to ask you. I don't have an Aura ring on. I just have my wedding band on. But I've always been intrigued by the Aura ring and the different technologies out there, like Sleep Score Lab and other organizations like that. Are there some technologies, resources, things that you've used or you've seen being used and you thought that's pretty cool? I like that, or that's useful. With obviously, there's no agenda or plugs, but just your experience. What do you like from the tech sector for sleep? That is.
so this is a very fast moving and emerging sector at the moment.
It is.
And they're sort of, from my perspective, we're always looking at perform typically referred to as validation studies, but really a performance evaluation to see how it compares to our sort of gold standard measures of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Evan Chinoy has been publishing a lot in this area, comparing a whole bunch of these products on the market to our gold standard polysomnography. That's the one with all the electrodes stuck all over you, or our sort of research grade wearable that uses actigraphy, the same sort of underlying principles of the sort of motion detection translated into a sleep-wake
Mm-hmm.
estimate. And most of the products on the market are doing very well at being able to estimate just general sleep versus wake, how much sleep you get in a night. They've all got sort of a little bit of error to them, but, on the whole, are doing a pretty good job. Where the market isn't at the moment is stages of sleep. So a lot of products will also offer, oh, you had this amount of light sleep and deep sleep and REM sleep. At the sort of the ones that have been evaluated, most of them are not much better than flipping a coin at putting you in which of those stages are. So I would take any of that sort of feedback from any of your wearables with a grain of salt. As you say, the Aura Ring has been pretty successful, and these products are also continuing to evolve as well. So I think the Aura Ring just put out a new sort of algorithm or software that may get closer to being able to actually predict those sleep stages as well as just general sleep wake timing. But it's hard for us as well to sort of evaluate everything, because usually those algorithms from those kind of companies are, definitely a black box and kept
Right.
very private. But one additional thing I'd say just for wearables is that they are a great way to sort of think about your sleep and improving your sleep, being more aware of how much you're getting. But just there is the potential that people sort of put too much weight into it and think, oh, it says I had a bad sleep. I must have had a bad sleep, or it says I had a good sleep, and so I'm good to go on everything. So your perception of what your sleep is like can actually influence how you feel too. So just sort of, I think about it as like the way I use my step counter. I, have a step goal each day, but I know that what it's telling me is not literally every step I took that day. It's just a sort of metric that I'm using, and I'm comparing within myself. Did I get more steps yesterday versus today? And so you can sort of see, like, did I get more sleep tonight than I did last night? That kind of thing.
I'll have to ask you, are there any kind of sleep tools that you personally like that you use, or that you found like, oh, this helped me? What's your any suggestions you have, things that you'd say you may want to try this, or what's been your experience?
So I don't actually use any sleep tracking. I don't
Are
own
you a good
any
sleeper?
watches and whatnot. I'm a pretty good sleeper, a little on the more on the light side than I'd like, but I do sort of try to protect my sleep and practice what I preach. But I would say one thing that I sort of do deliberately is have a um on my phone, I have a social media sort of time limit. So if I exceed that for the day, then I can always override it, but it gives me at least some sort of sense of how much I've been on it. And so if I'm in bed just before bed and scrolling through social media, which isn't sort of advisable, but if you do it and fall asleep, it's fine. But it's more about displacing the time that you would be asleep with scrolling.
Mm-hmm.
So because, these things are designed for you to just keep scrolling, if you can set your phone that has a time limit to it so that you have 15 minutes, and then when that like hits, you're like, okay, I'm now gonna sort of I'm not going to go any further than that.
Love it. That's a great tip. You actually took the words right out of my mouth, but I'm going to ask you to maybe share a few others. When you think about some deliberate practices coming from an expert, maybe that you use, but things that you have found to be effective ways to help people get to sleep and stay asleep. What are some tips, tricks, or deliberate practices, if you would, that you would recommend to people who maybe aren't the greatest of sleepers and they're looking for those sort of inside tips?
Yeah, so we have a whole series of tips for sleeping that we talk about as sleep hygiene. I don't know who coined that term, but
Great
that's
term.
what we sort of call it.
Uh-huh.
Um, and some of those things about your sleep environment, making sure that it's dark and it's quiet, and it's uh, cool, for example. So don't have the bedroom sort of too hot, because when you are falling asleep, your core body temperature drops, and you need to sort of dissipate that heat. And if your bedroom's too hot, then your body can't sort of lose that heat
How
naturally.
how cold how cold is acceptable, or what would you? I want to write this down
It's
because my wife is
it.
always like, "It's too cold in here," and I'm always, I'm
I was
sweating.
just about to say, it's definitely the amount of degrees vary, I think, between
Gender.
bed partners, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe we do need two
Um,
beds. I don't know. That's
okay.
or two
Yeah,
thermostats.
two thermostats, I mean, I think some beds you can set like different temperatures for, or you can get kind of quilts that are half really thick and half thin or something like that. But
I like that.
um
Yeah.
yeah. But also having a pre-bed routine can help you to fall asleep easier. So if you do the same couple of steps before you go to bed each night, then your brain learns that the next step is sleep. So if you sort of, brush your teeth, put the cat out, or whatever is I guess most cats are indoors these days. But, um, have these kind of series of steps that aren't, and they're not steps that are like check work email one last time and freak out that your boss just sent you a new email kind of thing. Like just relaxing, calm, quiet things, and do it in the same order, the same way every single time, and then have going to sleep after that can sort of help put your brain in that sort of ready to sleep state.
Love it. I definitely like the temperature suggestion, and I really think it's hard to build a healthy routine because you're right. I think it's instinctive to check your email, or is there something else I didn't get to tonight, and that can completely derail your sleep. So I'm going to stop
Mhm.
checking. I am my own boss, but I can be a real tough person to myself sometimes. So I'll put myself in check as well. All right.
Yeah.
I Awesome tips, and I've got one more round of games for you. So I want to move to a game that I call Myth or Reality. I love playing this with guests because in advance I do a little bit of research of things that people will conventionally say are myths or realities, and I'm going to get to ask you, an expert, which one do you think it is? Sometimes people say it's a reality and it's somewhere between a myth and a reality. You could ride the fence if you're not convinced either way, but I'd love to hear, a few of your thoughts about it if you are one way or the other have an opinion. So, are you ready?
Mhm.
All right.
I'm ready.
First one. Your body gets used to a lack of sleep. Is that a myth or a reality?
Myth.
It's a myth.
Yes, there's a really great study that um, sort of sleep restricted people over 2 weeks. So not sleep depriving, they were still allowed to have, there were different groups, but some people had, say, 6 hours sleep per night across the 2 weeks, which is, again, pretty reflective of a large portion of the American population getting 6 hours a night. And they measured their performance each day across that time, and it got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. When
Wow.
they measured how people felt, what they found is that over the first couple of days, people felt more and more sleepy, but then it hit a plateau and people sort of evened out on how they felt. So there becomes this disconnect between how you perceive yourself to be versus how well you're actually doing. And it's really with this sort of what we call cumulative or chronic sleep loss, where you're not getting as much sleep as you should day after day or night after night. That can all add up. And while you might subjectively feel like your body has adapted to it, there are other measures that show that it hasn't, and it's actually getting worse.
Awesome. Really great insight there. And I feel like, well, I have another myth of reality that I'm going to lay on you, but it kind of builds on this a little bit. 7 hours of sleep is actually better than 8 or 9 hours of sleep at night. Is that a myth or reality?
I would err towards myth. I don't think, I don't think you could ever say that 7 hours is better than 8 or 9. There
Hmm.
are individual differences in sleep needs. So some people, again, that sort of recommendation is from 7 to 9 hours to allow for that individual variation. So you might only need 7 hours a night to really perform at your best each day, whereas I need 9 hours of sleep per night to perform at my best each day. So 7 is definitely not always better than 9, but some people might be able to get away with 7.
That's interesting. It really does depend on the individual. I'm going to come back to a topic that you just brought up before, and I'm going to lay it on you. Ready? You can make up a sleep deficit just by sleeping longer the next night. Is that a myth or reality?
So this might fall into the meality category, but certainly if you haven't had enough sleep the night before, then getting recovery sleep, sleeping more the next night is going to be better for you. But um, but it doesn't necessarily fully undo what your body went through having had that sleep loss initially. Um, and it can often take more than just one good night's rest to recover from a bad night's rest. It might take you a couple of nights of good sleep to really get back to your best again.
All right. So, not a reality, but not a myth. It is somewhere between the reality space. Um, I'm going to ask you the idea about teenagers. Teens need more sleep each night versus adults. True or not true, or myth or reality?
That's a reality. Teens and adolescents, children typically need more sleep than adults. And also teens have on average a different sleep timing need too. So it's, there's the kind of the stereotype of the lazy teenager that sleeps in the morning. But this is actually part of their physiology driving them to sleep in later and to stay up later. So when we go through adolescence, the time in which our body wants to sleep is delayed a little bit during that period. And then as we're and then more sort of elderly people, that kind of shifts earlier again as well.
I've got something which some people will be distraught over, so I'm going to throw it out. Um, People do not eat spiders while they're sleeping. Have you heard this before? Is this a myth or is this a reality?
This is not within the scope of my research, but
But
so I don't know.
what do you
But
think?
I mean, I'm from Australia, and I feel like I would notice if a 2-inch hairy spider crawled into my mouth at night. But maybe there are smaller spiders that exist that might accidentally land there if you're breathing through your mouth.
I have
Um,
read unconfirmed that it is much more of a myth, though of course it's possible. It's not a general belief or convention that happens, but
Yeah.
I'll say unconfirmed, somewhere in the meality space.
Yeah.
I've got a couple more for you. How much a person sleeps at night can impact their weight? Is that a myth or reality?
So certainly a reality in that if you're not getting enough sleep, it can increase your risk of weight gain and obesity. And part of this relates to the timing of the sleep as well, and then the timing of your meals relative to your sleep. So we're learning more and more it's not just about what you eat, but when you eat it. So if you are having a shorter sleep episode, it might mean that you're also sort of awake until 2 a.m., say, when you should have gone to bed at midnight. And maybe you have a snack between 12 and 2 as well. And if you're eating at that time, you're eating when your body is designed to be asleep. It's not designed to process that intake of food. So it can lead to glucose intolerance. So you have a larger glucose spike because your body's not designed to sort of store up all that the glucose from that food, and that can increase the risk of, again, sort of obesity and type 2 diabetes, metabolic disorders.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. Well, we've come to our last question. A 26-minute nap is a great way to partially offset sleep loss at night. Is that a myth or a reality?
So as I indicated earlier, naps are a great way to sort of recover from sleep loss, or if you are having to do a night shift and your body is sort of promoting sleep during that time, if you have the opportunity to take a short nap, then that can help boost your alertness. And typically in the realm of sort of 20 minutes, you're going to get some benefits out of the nap. But again, being aware that you might have sleep inertia when you wake up out of that nap. So you want to allow probably a 20-minute nap and then allow 20 minutes before you return to any sort of safety critical duties. But typically, naps are good if you're feeling tired. If you're hungry, you have to eat. If you're sleepy, you have to sleep.
Is there any sort of credibility to the 26-minute nap? That number had been thrown out in a couple of places. There's a book I believe Daniel Pink had written and talked about the 26-minute nap. And it sounds so precise, it led me to believe there must be some science to it. Your thoughts? Is that matter,
I
the 26?
think I think the 26 minutes comes from, and it's sometimes referred to as the NASA nap, if it's the same sort of origin that I'm thinking of. And Dr. Mark Rosekind worked in the Fatigue Countermeasures Lab at NASA Ames back in the 90s, and he did a study looking at napping in the cockpit for pilots. And they were given sort of a 40-minute opportunity to nap, and they found that in that 40-minute opportunity, so they're sitting in their seat in flight, they were able to sleep for 26 minutes on average within that time, and that amount of sleep meant that they were more alert and better at performing on a reaction time task at top of descent, which is sort of just at the end of cruise, when it's sort of a safety critical period of the flight. So I think that sort of golden time of 26 minutes has evolved from that. But with naps, the length of the nap really, the benefits that you get from that nap really depend on your sleep-wake history. So have you been awake for 24 hours and you're taking a 20-minute nap? Or did you just lose 2 hours of sleep last night and this afternoon you're just taking a top-up nap? Or, are you napping in the middle of a night shift, or are you taking an afternoon nap? All of these things influence your sort of severity and duration of sleep inertia. and how much you can get out of that nap, how much it's going to boost your alertness.
So not all naps are created equal, not by a long shot.
This is true.
I like that. All right. Well, thank you for that. Thanks for the bonus question and that input. Cassie, I have one last thing to ask you. You've been a great guest. I've learned a ton in just a short amount of time about sleep. I hope I don't lose sleep oversleeping, which can happen. Any advice or suggestion you'd give to folks like me or folks who are listening and confronting issues like struggling with sleep and trying to better understand and quantify their own sleep? Any other recommendations that you would have to the listeners about that?
I think if you've tried to sort of put in place those sort of basic sleep hygiene suggestions in terms of making your sleep environment conducive to sleep, having this pre-bed routine, not drinking a cup of coffee or a Red Bull within a couple of hours of going to bed, sort of, try all the basic things first. But if you're still having sleep issues, then you really should just see your doctor. I'm not a clinician, so all advice is just sort of very general. But yeah, if you're really struggling with your sleep, then talking to your doctor about it is probably the best next step.
Awesome. And here I thought you were playing a doctor the whole time. Now, what a great opportunity to have a sleep researcher explain the work and the inside knowledge about sleep. So thank you for all the great insights. Cassie, pleasure to have you on. Thank you for being generous with sharing your wealth of knowledge. And certainly, if people want to follow you, they can follow you on LinkedIn or other social that you're on. And thanks once again for being part of the Deliberate Way.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a great time.